Okay.
This is the DRS train.
Fun fact, Marcha Real doesn't have any official lyrics, so consider that an authentic rendition. I'm Peter Brook, I'm joined by Nedzo's F1 Bridbox and Ace Shield, and you're listening to the DRS Train podcast. So, it seems for most of the Spanish Grand Prix we had a fairly typical race at Barcelona, again a circuit everyone knows well, and strategically okay, but little to no action. But then it seems that once Twinkie McTwinkerson's engine blew, it gave us some much needed excitement, didn't it, Nedzo?
I mean, I guess so. If you want to call him that, it was good for a Spain race. Like, there's only a handful I can properly remember in the past couple of years that have been on that level in terms of strategic input. Because usually, very rarely do you make certain strategies work. And the only time I can really remember something like what was going to happen was 21 when. Was it Mercedes who did the two-stop instead of over Red Bull, or it might have been the other way around? I can't exactly remember, but yeah, it was a good race. And then Max and George and everyone who was involved in that battle for those high positions just decided they were going to create possibly the most dramatic and controversial moments of the season, which was, yeah. I mean, we'll get into the incidents later, especially with Max. But it'll definitely be interesting to break down.
Yeah, I think this track, along with Brazil, these are the only two tracks where you can go wild with the tire strategy. And so 2 stoppers, 3 stoppers, they all become viable strategies. In Brazil, it is because the sprint format does weird thing to the tire allocations. So some drivers actually have enough tires to do a proper 3 stopper. And Brazil is actually a track where a 3 stopper is a worthwhile strategy. And Barcelona, simply because for whatever reason, you have the soft tire, even after it is used in qualifying, it is a valuable tire also for the race. And so the teams, since they can use the tire, they actually have 3 sets of soft and then 1 set of mediums, and you can naturally do a 3-stopper. And so you have this weird situation where actually, for the first time this year, we actually saw a strategical race.
It always... Yeah, that was the first thing my thought was, okay, we're not going to have any 1-stops, so that alone is a novelty, even though everyone except for one driver started the race on the same tyre. But we had people doing 3 stops against 2 stops, and some of them made it work, and, well, the safety car itself reset everything, which kind of undid that. But yeah, there was at least some strategic variation. It's just a shame that up until the safety car, there was relatively little actual on-track action, which is kind of a recurring theme with Barcelona. But also, going into this weekend, the big news was about the technical directive getting rid of the flexi wings, and everyone was wondering how much this is going to affect the grid order, particularly McLaren. It seems it didn't make much of any difference because they were still fastest. I mean, they've qualified. They locked out the front row and then finished a 1-2, and Max on a 3-stop managed to keep up with them because he's Max, but otherwise at the moment it seems like McLaren are just going to run away with this championship.
Yeah, I actually believe that we can hold up on the judgment for the TD as of now, because Barcelona always has been a very car track. Okay, so the best car actually tends to win here at Barcelona. And so we already knew that McLaren was the best car. And after the TD, maybe it is not as superior as it was before. But that we can only find out in the next races in Canada, which is a peculiar track. Then we have Austria and Silverstone. So we will see how the car behaves there. We also have upgrades coming around the time of Silverstone for Ferrari and Aston Martin. So the order will change from what we saw here. I believe that the Red Bull was fairly closer than it was at the beginning of the year, but not as close as it was at Imola. So yeah, I think the judgment can be kept on hold. Clearly, there was not the drastic difference that some people were expecting. So yeah, I don't think the McLaren is gonna lose the constructors' title after this TD.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think it is the point that it tends to be the case at Spain or at Barcelona that the best car always wins. I mean, 2012 wasn't that, but I'd say that we could see the difference because, as you said, the best car tends to win around Spain. But in the coming weeks, especially around the street circuits, especially around the circuits where they are more driver dependent, I'm not saying Spain isn't, but where the car has less of a bearing, you could see Max or Leclerc if the Ferraris do get better, or George if the Mercedes stop blowing up every 5 seconds. If those things stop happening, we could see the odd win being challenged. But in terms of ruthless consistency, it's always going to be the case that McLaren are going to win this constructors' title, even if all of the cars became equally fast. It's like a 2010 situation or something like that. Sonoda is useless. Hamilton is not useless, but he's not exactly there, is he? And Antonelli will probably have 8 million more mechanical failures before he gets another finish. So, yeah, McLaren are winning this constructors' title, and if they don't, then they will have to have the biggest 2009 Brawn moment in human history.
Okay, well, the constructors' title, that's a given because they have a lead of 200 points already, or something.
Really?
It's not.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. It's. I mean, looking at this, it's going to be. They could actually break records. I think for most points in a season by a team. Yeah, they're leading Ferrari by 198 points, so that they've got more than double the points of the next best team, because they've won all but 2 races. They've had double podiums in all but 2 races. So yeah, they're doing what Mercedes did 10 years ago, basically.
I think the most amount of points that Mercedes ever got was like 800, 900, but we've got more races since then, so...
Yeah, we're less than halfway. Well, we're what? How many? We're 9 races in out of 24.
Yes.
So, and they're on 360, so let's think 700. They could get over 900, close to 1,000 points at this rate. It's going to be quite something. But yeah, so the constructors is done. The drivers is not done in the same way that, well, we don't know which. It's going to be one of those two. We just don't know which. I mean, we'll get on to Max in a bit and see why he's now drifting out of contention. But in the races, it just seems so effortless from them. Because today they were covered in terms of strategy. I mean, it shocked me actually quite a bit that because they started on softs like everybody else, but they ran twice as long as some other cars did on the same tyre. And the people that pitted early were still tyre saving because it's the first stint. You have to tyre save no matter what. You can't ever think about pushing and driving the cars like they're meant to be driven or whatever. So the cars, they can run the tyres long, they can do this, and it's all fine. And within the two of them, Oscar, I mean, he got pole, and then Lando messed up the start again. It took him, 12, 13 laps, and he did eventually pass Max. But by then, the damage was done. He was too far behind. And that seems to be well, there's a thing, they were thinking of his new nickname for Piastri could be Ice Boy, because he's just sort of stone cold and emotionless and just cracks on with it, whereas Lando is fawning about mental health all the time and blah, 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 and letting himself get distracted. And we're in a position where it takes Lando 10 to 15 laps to do what Oscar can do straight away because he keeps messing starts up. But generally speaking, we have a title fight and it's still quite close with them. There's only 10 points separating them. But as it is, it hasn't exactly been spicy because both of them have spent more time fighting Max than they have spent fighting each other. But I think eventually we will get a collision or something of that nature. It just remains to be seen when.
I think that I think that the gap would be a lot bigger without. Well, it's not an I think, it's a definite that the gap would be a lot bigger if Australia hadn't have happened, and that's a 23-point swing just on its own, with Piastri finishing 9th there. And I believe that, I mean, Oscar's got the momentum well in his favour at the moment, but I believe that on this current form, he's going to win the title because Lando will get 1 in every 5, maybe every 6 race wins, like he has so far this season. But he's still even though he's had the fastest car or a car that's been at least like up at the best since like the first third of 2024. He hasn't got 2 consecutive race wins. Like that still baffles me how you can do that. And again, yeah, he will have his moments like Monaco where he did well enough to just hold everyone behind, and it was Monaco, and there are loads of caveats to that victory. Whereas Oscar this race didn't look like it, apart from maybe early from Verstappen where he might pull something out of the bag. He wasn't going to get challenged. Whereas Lando, he bottles another start. You'd think that he just as a driver, if you have one particular weakness, you just drill it until it doesn't become part of your psyche anymore. The only driver I can think of who really had the same issue like this was Mark Webber, and even then, like it wasn't like it was every start. It was maybe like once or twice a season where Webber would go from like pole to like 7th on the start. But I just don't see how Lando's doing this.
I mean, okay, his bad starts, they're not as bad as Webber's bad starts, but the difference is he does them in every single race instead of just a couple of times a season. But yeah, if Piastri had won Australia, he would have a lead of 40 points right now. And it's like, okay, this is like 2015 kind of territory where he's just going to have it easy, and Max is Vettel, and he's going to be squabbling around with Lando and getting and doing that kind of thing. But yeah, fair play to him. We'll get a new champion, only his 3rd season, which is relatively rare. I mean, okay, only Lewis and Jacques have done it in their 2nd, I believe, and only Fangio, and only Farina, if that counts, has done it in his 1st. So that's not bad going. And it breaks it's just part of me was like, well, I wouldn't mind seeing Max do it, because if Max can do it in that car, then like, holy shit, what this is unbelievable. But I don't think he's going to get the 5 consecutive titles, because I suppose one of the big consequences of this race was that Red Bull dropped 2 places in the constructors, so that the current 2nd place of all teams, surprisingly enough, is Ferrari, who had. Well, the race was interesting. I mean, they had Lewis just outqualified Charles, which I think is that the first time this year he's done it, or
in a Grand Prix, yes, not in a sprint.
in a race that counts. The sprint races don't count. So he did that, but then his pace was just Lewis had no pace all race. They had to use orders to let Leclerc through. He built out a gap of more than 10 seconds on him. And then and then Leclerc. I mean, I was, to be honest, because he admitted after that restart that he actually hit Max. I'm surprised he didn't get any kind of penalty for that, even if it was like a 5-second penalty or whatever. But yeah, he did the restart well. Lewis, got passed by Hülkenberg at the end, nearly got passed by Hadjar. So I don't know what was happening. And even in the interview after the race, they asked him, like, have you learned anything from this triple header? And he just goes, no, nothing. And it's like, well, in Miami, weren't you saying that you'd finally cracked the code with this Ferrari and you think you've worked it out now? What's happened there? So that was fun. But it seemed, they're all thereabouts on pace with like Mercedes, but it's hard to say with where it's going to go with Ferrari at the moment.
The race reminded me of Hungary 1998, because Max Verstappen was on the inferior car and went on a 3-stopper, and he tried to win, and almost succeeded, because we have to recognize that when he stopped the first time and when he stopped the last time before the safety car, he was closer to the McLarens in front the last time he stopped than the first time he stopped. So on the 2 stints he did in the middle, he was faster than the McLarens. And the car clearly was not better than the McLarens. So Max Verstappen was trying to pull out a magical moment like Schumacher did in 1998. But the difference is in 1998 there was refueling. So the teams were very constrained in strategy, You put the amount of fuel in the car and you cannot go beyond that lap. And so this is no longer the case today. Once McLaren saw what Max was doing, all they needed to do was to keep their drivers out until Max stopped for the last time. And so either of 2 things would have happened. Max Verstappen had enough pace to overtake the McLarens before the last pit stop, and at this point it is McLaren that undercuts Verstappen, and so they keep the win, the 1-2. Scenario 2, which is what actually happened, Verstappen did not catch up to the McLarens, and so the last stop, he was trying to undercut the McLarens, but at this point, McLaren just had to pit their drivers and get them still ahead of Verstappen, and that's exactly what they did, and they kept the win. So the difference is that from the refueling era is that the current era allows you for far more flexible strategies. Why haven't we seen it until now? Because the teams don't have enough tires to do flexible strategies, so they're constrained by the tire allocations. And this was the one race where tire allocation was not a problem because you can use the soft tires you used in quali. And so we finally saw for once, I think, a very giving strategical race.
Well, this was helped, I suppose, with Ferrari because Leclerc had an extra set of soft tires for the race. Because I think didn't he only do one? He only did one run in Q3, I think, didn't he? Also, or he'd saved a set of tires for the race.
Yes, Leclerc had compromised his qualifying to have a better race. He tried after FP3, basically all the grid except the two Haas went for one set of hards and one set of mediums, and the rest set of soft. And Leclerc instead used two sets of soft tires in FP3, so that he went into quali with two sets of mediums and just three sets of soft. And then he used a set of soft for each qualifying session. He got to Q3, had to qualify early on his remaining set of soft tire. And so, yes, he compromised his qualifying, but so that he could have a stronger race. And that's exactly what we saw. You know, Leclerc claimed that the team was against the decision. The team wanted him to do what Hamilton did. And, I mean, there's obviously a problem with Lewis Hamilton, so it's not fair to compare that Leclerc did better than Hamilton because he compromised his own quality. But you cannot claim that Leclerc did a bad decision by compromising his qualifying because Leclerc had absolutely excellent race pace. You know, he was beating the Mercedes, and I think it was quite close between Ferrari and Mercedes yesterday.
I mean, maybe he's learning that it's time to stop listening to the team and start thinking of my own ideas and strategy. And yeah, he's doing a bit of a Prost, you know, sacrificing qualifying for race pace, which to be honest, everyone should do because unless it's Monaco, qualifying really doesn't matter. Like if it's a circuit you can overtake on, you'll make the difference in the race.
I was going to say the only counterpoint to that is like what sometimes Prost back in his day would qualify like 12th, and nowadays you couldn't do that because you'd spend half the race getting past other cars.
Yeah, but it's just that it's also this is another general thing. I was going to bring it up later, but it's also like. Because as I mentioned before, tyre saving, everyone does it in the first stint and nothing happens. Even the people that ran the softs for half the length that the McLarens ran it. So even with tyre saving, you still can't make them last that long. Here's a thought. Maybe just once someone's going to try pushing properly and they do an extra, maybe they do 3 or 4 stops, you know, save their tyres up for the race itself. I think, oh, well, it doesn't matter if I don't have the perfect setup because if I'm going to run 4 or 5 seconds a lap faster than everyone else, I'll just barge my way through them. And yeah, the tyres might go off a bit faster and I just pit a few extra times. But yeah, it's just so much faster, especially at circuits like Singapore where there is such an extreme difference when they're like, you know, 15 seconds off the pace or whatever. It's like, just go. You could go 10 seconds a lap faster. In 3 laps, you have an entire pit stop advantage. And everyone else is freaking out because they're like, hold on, we're not supposed to do this. We're supposed to go as slow as possible and save the tyres and run long. What do I do now? We're 30 seconds behind. Like, it might force everyone else to do the same thing. It's like, maybe just try it, especially if you're right at the back like Tsunoda and you're not going to get points. Just do something different. Maybe the tyres will last. Because it seems if you want them to last, they can go for 50 laps. So maybe they would only go for 20 if you just go balls to the wall.
Tsunoda did something different. He went to the correct setup because they claimed they put him on the wrong setup for qualifying because they wanted to experiment. And so, yes, I guess the experiment actually compromised Tsunoda. But in the race, Tsunoda was on a 3-stopper, just like Verstappen. And he pitted early. I think he was the first car to pit along with who else pitted first? Berman? No.
Behrman, one
Maybe
of the
it was
Haas's,
Berman.
but yeah, again, he was the only
Yeah.
driver that started on mediums. Everyone else was on softs, and he pits first. Like, I was like, "What are you doing?" I thought the idea was that you run long when you're at the back to try and overcut people, and they pit in first. Like, you've just just try.
He
Use some
did. He
common
did a
sense.
Singapore
Like,
2008, but
yeah, well, that's
nobody
what.
crashed.
Well, yeah. So he did. It's like you were supposed to crash. It was not him. Antonelli.
But
Like what?
look, there is many options you can do. You can pit very early so that you can undercut everybody. And I don't know why he did that with the medium tire. I guess the team thought that the medium was so bad that the soft tire was absolute king, best tire of all. So just get the medium off to the shitters as soon as possible to get on the soft. That those are the real tires, to be honest. Tsunoda was out in Q1, so he actually had a few sets of new soft tires, and people claimed that the new soft tire was actually a good deal better than used soft tires. Nico Hülkenberg got that amazing start, 5 places in the first lap, because he had new soft tires, and the driver's head were on used soft tires. So that's what they said. I'll take their words for it. But from this point of view, if the team believes the soft tire is the actually absolute best tire possible, then it only makes sense to get rid of the medium tire as soon as possible, and without it actually affecting the strategy. Because he used the medium tire when he was at the far back of the field, stuck, unable to overtake. So yes, he got rid of the medium tire as soon as possible. From this point of view, it actually makes sense what they did. It didn't work out. And I didn't follow his race closely enough to understand why it didn't work out, so I cannot make any claim on it.
Yeah, I mean, this is just another general point on tyres, but we're at the point where, as well as the tyres not working, the only one that anyone ever wants to use is either the softs or the medium. Like the hard tyre, forget about it. In most races, the soft tyre, oh no, it's a crap. It doesn't even work in qualifying. And this time, it's like, oh, the soft tyre is the only good one. It's like this is not how it needs to be. Like we shouldn't have to be putting up with this for 14 years. It's just.
If anybody remembers, what you just said used to be the case in 2011. The first year, everybody was just trying to get rid of the hard tire as soon as possible because the soft was the tire to be in. Okay, the soft was the one that kept on giving the gift. And so
back then it was only the prime and the option. They only had 2 compounds per race, whereas now they've got 3 and they're still using only 1 set per race. We don't need this. This is not Formula tire management. It's Formula One. We just need to get past this and go back to like the Schumacher school of driving, where you do 30 qualifying laps in a row. But back to Ferrari. So yeah, Leclerc, amazing race. Lewis, just went backwards. I mean, he was questioning the strategy himself because he got brought in quite early, or what he thought was early, and they were trying to protect against an undercut from Mercedes, but that didn't work anyway because they just then undercut him in the second segment, in the second stint. And yeah, the pace hadn't worked. It's not working in general this season for him because there's very little difference in performance with Mercedes. So even if he'd stuck with Mercedes, not much would have changed other than he might finally actually have some engine failures. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, 100 million a year in the bank, I'm sure is lovely, but yeah, elsewhere it's not going his way.
I rue the fact that we don't have a Lewis fan on this episode today, because I would really love to hear their opinion on the driver.
I don't think we've ever had a Lewis fan on the podcast.
I cannot make any claim about Lewis's form. I don't care enough, and my opinion, my point of view is clearly he has some issues with the current cars. I don't know if it's just the team, if it was just a coincidence that both Mercedes and Ferrari struggle with those cars, if it is a wider issue with the ground effect cars, or if it is a wider issue with his age. I simply don't know. With time, we will see.
a psychological thing, and he still hasn't got past Abu Dhabi. Every once in a while, he
Could
still brings it up.
perfectly
But
be. Yes,
there's a lot of
it
things it
just
could be.
how do we get an answer? I think if we had a Lewis fan who really follows him closely, he understands Lewis, and so he can draw the differences from how he used to be, and maybe draw some very thoughtful conclusion. I cannot do that. I can only say with time we will see what the issue is with Lewis Hamilton. But right now, I cannot comment.
Obviously, I'm not a Lewis fan. I think we can all agree with that. I mean, I've got the Pride T-shirt, but I haven't got. I'm not necessarily a Lewis fan. But what I can say is, you've mentioned psychologically. I don't think it's psychological, especially not from Abu Dhabi 21. When you're driving along a Formula One car, you don't think of something that happened 3 years ago, unless it's like China 2007 when you're coming into the wet pit lane. Like you might do it consciously if it's like something like that, but you won't. You won't have the psychological downturn from something that happened 3 years ago. You just wouldn't. I do think it's just that Lewis doesn't like these modern cars because he came into racing when the cars were agile, when they were more like they handled more naturally. And this is something I can do because I do a lot of sim racing, and I find myself I'm really good at driving cars that are from before 2000 because they need a bit more power sliding and they need a bit more finesse. I struggle driving modern Formula One cars on sim racing and doing league racing because they are more prone to snapping, and they are like when they lose control, it's a lot quicker than it was even 10-20 years ago. And I think that Lewis just can't adapt to that because there are some drivers, Verstappen for example, who can sit right on that limit. And I think Lewis grew up in an era where you could be just over that limit and be fine. But nowadays, if you go just over the limit, you get a massive snap of oversteer, or you get a massive bout of understeer, and you just can't control what the car does. And I think that he's driving under the limit to make sure he doesn't go over the limit, or when he does go over the limit, he doesn't know how to control it. We've seen this with his racecraft. We've seen it with his with everything that's happened with him. He hasn't got the same ability to execute at that top level that other drivers have. And I think that it's partly due to, I think, the cars that don't really suit his style. He's adapting to a new environment. But then again, I don't buy the whole adapting to the new environment thing because by this time in his career, Schumacher had just as bad a... This car isn't even bad. It's like it's like a lower front end, upper midfield car. And Schumacher won in a car like that in Spain. Yes, it was pouring it down with rain, so it mattered who the driver was more than the car did. But Schumacher was winning at this point in his Ferrari career. I'm trying to think of other drivers who went to a team like great drivers who've gone to a team and they didn't struggle as much. Even Senna in the 1985 Lotuses and the 1986 and 7 Lotuses, he was getting wins and pole positions. Like, I don't buy the whole excuse. The great drivers can outperform their machinery, and they very rarely need time to adapt. I think the only example I can think of is maybe Lauda when he went to McLaren, but he was also coming out of retirement and all that sort of stuff that went along with that. I don't know what it is for Lewis, to be frankly honest. It's probably a mix of factors. A mix of him being past it, a mix of him not gelling with the Ferrari's handling characteristics, him not gelling with F1 cars' handling characteristics. It's just baffling because, like, again, we're against George, where he showed glimpses of potential. In 2022, he was actually slightly faster in qualifying. In 2024, in the races, don't get me wrong, he used to qualify like really low down, but then he would show amazing race pace to be able to get back up the pack. But this year, there's been nothing. Like, as I said, he's only out qualified Charles twice across the entire season, and one of them was in a sprint, and the other one was because Charles didn't do a run in Q3. He has no qualifying pace. In the races, he hasn't shown anything of note. He like with the great drivers you usually see, even if they have a bad year or a bad time of things, they have like one or two standout moments. Like 2005 for Michael, I'd say. I'd say probably Imola was his best race. Ace might be able to comment on that, but with certain drivers, you see like good moments, even if they're having a bad time of things. But Lewis this season, I haven't seen any good moments. I haven't seen any like amazing overtakes. I haven't seen any great tyre saving runs. I haven't seen anything like that. And again, we are 9 races into a 24 race season, so that could happen, and we could see, I don't know, go to Silverstone and he outqualifies Charles on merit for the first time this season in a Grand Prix weekend. But when you're having to clutch at straws, maybe that's when you have to realise that maybe your driver isn't as good as he used to be.
Okay, let's not forget the China sprint pole and sprint win. But yeah, aside from that, it has been pretty bleak so far this year for Lewis. But again, I very much would rather wait and see how things develop, even next year, than start to make comments about what might be the problem, his current form. We will find out eventually.
Yeah, next year might be his saving grace because there'll be another change of technical regs. But I think as well as him clearly not enjoying the ground effect cars, another thing we have to point out is he's no longer in the fastest car. And that does seem to make a difference. Because one thing I noticed when I looked at this myself is that with most champions, a lot of their best races and best performances came in the seasons where they didn't win the championship and weren't in the best car or on the back foot. With Lewis, how many standout races has he had since 22? Not very many. Indeed, he's had a lot of races which could be considered his worst ever performances. There have been, in a lot of cases, even if he qualifies badly, he'll inevitably move forwards. I think yesterday was one of the few cases where he actually went backwards. But there haven't been he got 2 wins. Yes, I mean a lot of things needed to happen for him to get those wins. But otherwise, there haven't been many charges from the back to the front or anything, or holding off people behind him in much better cars. It just hasn't happened.
I will also point out that in 2009, when the McLaren was awful, his average gap to Heikki Kovalainen in qualifying, when they both had no issues or faults, was 0.02 of a second. And during the races, I believe Kovalainen was before Germany, I said, which was, I think, when the car started becoming good. He was, I think, only 5 seconds ahead in the races. Now, considering the gaps to Kovalainen in 2008 were far higher than that, it does put to pay that he is worse when he's in a worse car, more proportionally than when he's in the best car.
Yeah, which you can argue as well with Max, to be honest, because whenever the Red Bull struggles, that's when whoever his washed teammate this weekend is then suddenly closes up to him and maybe even beats him. It's a funny one there, but yeah, I mean 2009, yeah, that was abysmal, and then they slap a double diffuser on and he wins the next race, and we're back to our regular scheduled programming. Yeah, maybe that's enough Lewis bashing for one episode. So they spent most of the race fighting with Mercedes. Pace-wise, they were, 4th fastest or 3rd and a half fastest, depending on how you look at the Red Bull situation. It wasn't there. I mean, they managed to get around Lewis on strategy, and then, as we said, Twinkie McTwinkerson, his engine blows. The race is saved, although he's now had a triple header where he hasn't scored any points, having got a sprint pole. Miami wasn't a that wasn't a triple header. So 3 races in a row. So his points average on the score has dropped substantially. When he was after 2 races, he was in the top 10 of drivers all time for points average or something, and now he's in the top 70 or 80. But yeah, they're just doing their thing. George is still being kind of supreme, but I think we need to make a point about what happened with Verstappen as well, because he does that dive bomb on him, forces Verstappen off, and then obviously the team advised Verstappen to let him through, but it's he shouldn't have had to be honest, because he only went through that escape road because George pushed him off at the end of the day. And then that gives us the other collision, which, yeah, is a weird one. But yeah, pace-wise, it's sort of okay from Mercedes.
I almost wish there was not a safety car, because clearly the battle between Ferrari and Mercedes, Ferrari decided to prioritize track position, and so they anticipated both pit stops to defend from eventual undercuts, and maybe have a worse, longer last stint, but ahead. And instead, Mercedes went for the best possible strategy of beating on the right laps, so that the car was as fast as possible in the end. And so the safety car came out, and it kind of compromised Russell, because he was on newer tires, so was going to catch up to Leclerc. We would have seen the actual order between Ferrari and Mercedes. We didn't, because the Mercedes engine blew up on Antonelli. So, Mercedes kind of shoot themselves twice in the foot, and so they compromised themselves. And yes, Antonelli, unfortunate retirement, then worst ever placement for a Mercedes driver, and then another retirement. All three basically not his fault. Monaco, yes, but only qualifying at the race was not his fault. And yes, so hard to say how good was the Mercedes. I think it was a fair bit good. Russell, then after the safety car restarted, don't even know how to call it. He understeered into Verstappen. It was at fault. I am honestly surprised he did not get penalized for that. He shoved Verstappen off the track. That should be a penalty, in my opinion. They didn't give him a penalty. Then brain fart at Red Bull pit wall that they told him to let George through, and then we can cover the incident later. Anyway, George finished before. Very good. I don't think better could have been possible. So yeah, nothing more to say about Mercedes. I had to say more about Mercedes. Nothing more to say about Russell. About Antonelli, he was nowhere all weekend compared to Russell. Then out of nowhere, for no apparent reason, the last lap of Q3 on use of tire, he goes 2 tenths and a half slower than Russell. He was never closer than Russell all weekend. And he was 2 tenths and a half slower on use of tires. How he did that, I don't know. But anyway, it's good. And then in the race, he was not on George's pace. When he retired, he was 13 seconds behind George, which around 50 laps, 13 seconds would be 13, 26, 49, 50, 4 tenths a lap slower.
Just over 3 tenths a lap.
Yeah, so that's the gap Antonelli has to overcome in the following years.
Yeah, I've just for those who realize I've been diverting my gaze, I was looking at my phone because I was just checking the Verstappen Russell incident. But yeah, I think that George basically did all he could this weekend, and I mean Antonelli's getting there. He's going to be a learning process. I mean, for everything we say about other drivers, like for example, we've talked about Lewis not being able to adapt, I think we can give concessions to a rookie and to a driver who's been fast-tracked to the junior series. He's not ended up like an Esteban Tuedo. He's not ended up like other drivers, especially in recent years. Your Stoffel Van Dorns, your I wouldn't call Pascal Wehrlein a junior series prodigy, but people who have been rated highly by their peers. He's not ended up like those. He's just plodding along. And I think if he'd have gone up against a teammate like Isaac Hadjar's been up against, or like Gabby Bortoletto's been up against, or Ollie Behrman's been up against, I think if he was to go up against Ocon or Hulkenberg or Lawson, he'd have been either equal to or better than them. Like, I think that's pretty easy. So the fact that he's been going up against George and being maybe 2, maybe 3 attempts off of qualifying most weekends, and about 10, 15, 20 seconds off in the races from memory. Those statistics might be slightly off, but considering that he's not been doing a bad job when George is, in my opinion, probably the second best driver on the grid at the moment. Maybe fighting for third with Leclerc, but again, he's one of the better drivers on the grid, and he's definitely stacking up well against him. I think I'd argue that at some points, especially compared to the worst parts of 22 or 24, he's probably doing better against George than Lewis did at some points. And again, it's only at parts; it's not overall. But I think that's partially true.
He is doing well, and I think we'll see a lot more from him in the future. I was thinking a few days ago, because this year is the 75th anniversary of Formula One. In 25 years, we have Formula One centenary. And I was going through my mind thinking about, okay, what might have happened in that time? And I was thinking, okay, well, every former champion up until Schumacher will be dead. Schumacher himself would be in his 80s by that point, so probably with his condition, I don't think so. But in terms of Antonelli, he legitimately could still be here, because he'd be the same age as Alonso he'd be 43, 44. So if he, he could theoretically still be on the grid in 25 years' time, and maybe by then Robin Raikkonen has won a couple of titles because he'll be mid-30s, so he might have a few behind him. Freddie Slater, maybe he'll have come and gone. I don't know, but Antonelli and even at a stretch, Behrman could still be on the grid if the longevity and if drivers just start getting older and older and realizing they can do this longer and longer, then they might still be here, and they'll be knocking on approaching 500 race starts as well if the calendars just get longer and longer. Okay, so
yes, we can move on to Red Bull finally.
Okay, fine, Red Bull. Yeah.
Yes, finally.
So Max, before the safety car, for him it was going reasonably well because he did the 3-stop against the 2-stop for them, and even with that deficit of 20 seconds, he still caught up with them. There was the odd moment of it was, funnily enough, it was Tsunoda and Lawson getting in the way and both attempting overtakes at turn 1 and getting in the way and interfering. Helped him get a bit close to them, but then a few laps before the safety car came, the McLaren had started to check out and break away. I'm not convinced after that safety car. They put him on hards, and it's like you had nothing else left. It's like you must have, even if it's a used set of softs, it will last for 10 laps, or what ended up being 5 laps because of how long the safety car went on. Because as Lewis said over the radio, they do love wasting time because that safety car did not need to last for more than 3 laps because they needed to just, if they'd let the back markers overtake sooner and they were going at like full race speed to catch up, it would have been done faster. But he must have had a set of hot softs, even a set of mediums that could have lasted you for 5 laps, but just not the hards. So he's right to feel aggrieved about that. Almost loses it on the corner exit, gets hit by Charles. Again, as we saw, that was Charles' fault. So again, I can see he's annoyed about that. Loses the podium. Then George dives him, pushes him off track, doesn't lose a position, but then is told to give the position up when he shouldn't have to because why? Like, it was not... that's a dive bomb. But then he drives into him, and it's like, no, you know what you were doing. You know what that means. Everyone can see what you're doing. You were very lucky to only be given a 10-second penalty and 3 points on his license as well.
So just about the tire allocation, he came into the race with 1 set of new hards, 1 set of new mediums, and 4 sets of soft from quali. He started on the soft, then pitted, I don't know if for soft or medium, but anyway, he put the other at the third stint. So before he pitted for the last stop, he had used up 2 sets of softs and 1 set of mediums. He pitted for a set of soft, so he used up, before the safety car, all the mediums and 3 out of 4 set of soft. Now, at the pit wall, at the team radio, we heard Horner saying we did not have any other tire. So my guess is maybe the last set of soft was compromised after qualifying. Maybe Max went very hard over a curb and got a puncture, a slow puncture. I cannot know. Maybe that last set of soft tire just was not available. So yes, if they pitted, they only had the set of new hards available. So in my opinion, the choice, and I was quite surprised that they didn't, was to keep Max out at the safety car. He would be leading the race. Somehow he would do something. Putting me out on hards did not turn out to be the right choice at all. And we saw again a Max Verstappen that when things go wrong, when things start to go against him, and the odds, the luck, everything, when the team screws up or someone else gets one over him, he just goes mad with rage. No longer he drives with fury. He drives no longer using his brain. That's the real core of the issue. Max Verstappen is amazing at driving because he's extremely fast, but he always uses his head when managing the tires, when pushing, when doing a 3-stopper, when he has to battle other drivers to get them out of the way as soon as possible. He always uses his head, except when he's angry. When he's angry at the wheel, he stops using his head. And that's why he gets all these brain farts moment, last year in Mexico, last year at Austin, this year in Spain, last year in Hungary. In 2021, the brain farts moment started to happen after Brazil. But Brazil already, but also every race after. Verstappen had brain farts moment. Why? Because things started going against him. Okay, and he stopped using his brain. He just started to shove people off the road, try to go as fast as possible. And he did not mature since 2021.
Yeah, I tend to agree with most of that. The thing that bugs me about this incident is that by the rules, by the modern racing rules we have, his move, if it wasn't obvious intent behind it, his move was perfectly legal on George because he was ahead at the apex, he was in control of his car, and he didn't go off the track. By those definitions, that move was completely legal. Now, as I said, in no circumstance should that be even considered to be legal in any way. And that's why these, again, we've talked about ahead of the apex multiple times. That's why it needs to be binned off, and it needs to be replaced with a rule that's set that actually is conforming to to racing rules around the world and in other series, because it's stupid. And I mean, Max got away with it. I think people say a 10-second penalty was not harsh enough. The thing is, again, we look at the historic precedents for quote unquote intentional things that were never actual takeouts. Vettel against Hamilton in Baku, that was a 10-second penalty. I mean, it wasn't obviously that was a stop go, I believe, so that's slightly different. But I think that with nowadays, George had no major effect from it. It wasn't people comparing it to Jerez 97. It's just not the case because I didn't see George's battery hanging on by a thread. People again, don't get me wrong, it's an intentional. It's not even an intentional crash or an intentional wreck. It's just an intentional. I'm not going to call it a nudge or anything like that because that's downplaying it. But it was an intentional contact that was unnecessary. And I believe if you're going to make a harsh ruling on that, you're going to set a precedent, and you're going to say that anything that is deemed intentional is heavily punished. But then again, you could say what George did to Max was intentional. He intentionally dive bombed him, and he intentionally forced him off the road. And then you could go down the results of that. And I'm not suggesting that those incidents were in any way the same or similar, but it's just that entire situation was just a perfect visualization of everything that happens in modern Formula One. Everything that happens in modern Formula One is a driver forcing another off a track because the rules say they can, rather than leaving one car's width. That driver then being told they have to give the position back because they use runoffs instead of gravel, so that the punishments can be actually visualized and so you can see what the driver has lost. So then you can give the driver an appropriate penalty. And then ahead at the apex, saying that you can essentially do that to someone, and by the rules, it's technically legal, but by common sense, it's not. So yeah, it's just. There's a lot of things about the circuit that need to be fixed, and there's a lot of things about the driving standards that need to be fixed. Because again, I think I said this I can't remember when it was, but the last time Max, or I can't remember who the last time did something dodgy like this. If you say to a young kart driver driving in whatever series they want to, a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, that by doing that you can if you feel aggrieved by your rival, you can clatter into them and put you didn't put them into a barrier, but you can clatter into them, and that kind of contact in a car could easily put someone into a barrier, and you can do that and you can get a 10-second time penalty. We are going to see kids injuring and killing each other because of them seeing Max Verstappen do this. And I know that previous generations have grown up with Schumacher, and they've grown up with Prost, and they've grown up with Senna. But I think nowadays, with the globalization of Formula One, with the impact that it has on modern culture, more so than it has ever done so, the FIA needs to take a good look at themselves and say, we need to set a precedent for intentional contact. Because if they don't, it is going to end up like NASCAR. We're going to get to a point where it's basic. I'm not saying that people are just going to literally get up under each other's rear diffusers and turn them around on purpose. but you were getting to a point where that's starting to be accepted with lenient punishments, and I believe that again. I don't agree with Max getting a race ban for just that incident because it's ridiculous. That doesn't account for the penalty point system. But if you're going to if you're going to set a precedent for this, you have to do it. And otherwise, if you don't set a precedent, it's just gonna get worse. It's just gonna get worse, and Max is gonna keep doing it, and whoever comes next is gonna keep doing it. It's just ridiculous.
It kind of shows why the new rules on overtaking everything is stupid, because it was technically legal because of being ahead of the apex. Like, maybe we should just, because that's how a video game, and then we know this, that's how the games determine penalties. So like, maybe just use some common sense actually with it. But also, I think what should have happened is that, yeah, Max gets black flagged, but then George and Leclerc also get 5-second penalties, I think, for their own contacts. But Max, yeah, he was lucky not to get black flagged. He did get 3 penalty points on his license, so he is now 1 point away from a race ban. So that there is every reason that could happen, because I think his next points expiring doesn't happen for quite some time. So even 30th of June.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's got 2 races now. In which time it could be some very minor infraction in
like missing the weighbridge or something daft like that.
Something that, or blocking somebody in FP3, and bam, he's banned. And then the next race we have Lawson and Tsunoda in the Red Bulls qualifying on the back row. Fun times.
Yeah, just wanna say Leclerc gets a penalty, Russell gets a penalty, and Verstappen gets black flagged, and we have an easy Nico Hülkenberg Sauber podium saying. Anyway, just a consideration on Max's behavior. Yes, he so far in his career, the stewards have been lenient on him. You know, he always gets away with stuff. You know, if he gets the penalties, they are less than what they give other drivers. You know, and this enables his behavior. You know, he can be so aggressive, so irresponsible, precisely because he doesn't get punished. You know, Alonso, Lewis Hamilton, they would behave just like Max Verstappen is behaving right now if the stewards were as lenient on them as they are on Max Verstappen, and vice versa. If the stewards start to get tough with Verstappen, Max Verstappen will finally start driving like everybody else, like any excellent overtaker, like Alonso, like Lewis Hamilton, you know. But as long as the stewards don't get their foot down and get tough with him, he's gonna be behaving like he is now.
The thing is, when it comes to deciding these things, what other options do you have? I mean, you could argue 10-second stop go is an option. You could argue a driver is an option.
Okay, Okay, Max Verstappen got 10 seconds because his crash with Russell was considered intentional. You know, Alonso last year in Australia got a drive-through because his brake testing on Russell was considered intentional. You know, Alonso did not make contact with Russell. Verstappen made contact with Russell. Alonso gets a drive-through. Verstappen gets a 10-second. You know, that's the difference I'm talking about.
That's a fair point. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think I know you judge it on the incident, not the outcome. But that, I mean, even then, the difference between a 10-second and a drive-through is literally a point. I know it's the incident, not the. But yeah, I mean, it's just Max is having this head loss, and I'm glad you mentioned the Lawson and Tsunoda thing about if Max does get a race ban. I'll tell you what that would remind me of. Perfect situation, 1994, because you have two drivers in the clear best car by at least for part of the season. It was the best car, but would just have issues, and for the rest of the season, it was miles quicker than anything else. And then and they have 2 drivers that conveniently don't know how to drive it and aren't driving fast enough. And then you've got the guy who is the prodigy. Admittedly, Schumacher hadn't won any championships at that point. In the car that is slower and harder to drive, yet is somehow dragging it to somewhat in the ballpark of the guys in front. It would be so funny if Max was to get banned, and you'd have, like we had when Schumacher was banned in '94, Leto and Verstappen. Ironically, Verstappen's dad, pulling that car to no points. It would be quite funny.
And yeah, maybe we'll see that happen because he's got, as we said, 2 races, 2 races to fix it. But even if, even with everything that happened, Max still won driver of the day. So that's fun. But yeah, next team up, and do my eyes deceive me? It's Kick Sauber. What a weekend they had. Maybe the technical directive is working for them. I don't know. But Bortoletto, I mean, a career best quali of 12th and a career best finish of 12th, I think. Hülkenberg makes he gains 5 places at the start, and look at him. He's running the strategy. They're doing 2.5 second pit stops instead of 2.5 minutes, and he's running. He's creating space in front of him, and then he moves on Lewis. I mean, that's the best race he's had in years, and Sauber's best race in years as well.
Mattia Binotto is filled with pride right now. We made the joke in Australia that Sauber was outscoring Ferrari, and now we see a Sauber legitimately overtaking a Ferrari. I think Mattia Binotto is filled with pride right here, where the heart is.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the thing with Hulkenberg. Like there will be like 3 or 4 times a season where you just think it's undoubted that he will be in our tops and he will be in our tops at the end of this episode, and he is just he can just pull off these fantastic performances. I mean, yeah, it's obvious that Sauber is better than it was one race ago, but the fact that he is in that position is incredible. And as I said, Bortoletto wasn't even in the points. So Hulkenberg being up in 6th place, it just shows that he does pull off these odd performances. Like I think Silverstone last year was one of them where he just pops up out of nowhere, and ironically, then he finished 6th. I mean, he finished 6th on track here, I suppose. And it is just really really good. And also the fact this is tied with his 2nd best result of his career, and that's just mental.
Okay, so finally, since Sauber is doing well, we can actually make a section about Sauber that is actually filled with something interesting to talk about, not just saying, worst car on the grid and stuff. So, first of all, Nico made a mistake in quali, He had all the upgrades. The car is excellent, okay? It came into this weekend with new upgrades, floor, body, a full... rehorse of the car, it was the real upgrade, and it absolutely worked. Okay, the car did not look anything great in free practice. In any of the free practices, it looked solid. Okay, not the worst. But then it came to qualifying, and Nico was out in Q1, and one shrugs it off. The Sauber is always out in Q1. Now that we know what happened, Nico made a mistake and underperformed. Bortoletto got into Q2 and then qualified 12. Excellent, but the car had more, and in the race we saw the more. The Sauber was the best midfielder car this weekend. Okay, Nico Hülkenberg overtook Alonso legitimately on track. We all saw it, amazing battle. Then Nico Hülkenberg went for the undercut on Gasly and made it work. And then with laps 10... with tires 10 laps older than Hajar, then Alonso, then Lawson, then Bortoletto, he was lapping faster than them. He was lapping the same lap times of Hajar on laps 10 tires 10 laps older. He was lapping faster than Alonso. Okay, that Sauber was just kicking off. It was incredible. When the safety car came out and equalized the strategies, now Nico had the best car and made an amazing pass on Hajar, and then another pass on Hamilton. Incredible stuff. The start, he went from 16th to 11 on lap 1. Incredible. I make a point that you always have to recognize when your driver screws up qualifying. But if in the race he recovers perfectly, if he finishes in a place where you cannot legitimately claim he could have done any better by qualifying further ahead, and clearly Nico could not have done anything better than 5th place if he got into Q3 anyway. At this point, he did bad in quali, but it doesn't matter. Nico kicked off on Sunday, and that's all that mattered. And we saw the difference with Bortoleto. Bortoleto had the same car. He did well, but he did not do excellent. Bortoleto, after the safety car restart, got stuck behind Lawson. Hülkenberg overtook the faster Racing Bull, and Bortoleto cannot overtake the slower Racing Bull. Bortoleto could have scored, should have scored. He has problems. He's not. Maybe he's more consistent than Nico. Nico tends to screw up a few too many times. But anyway, Bortoleto was not on Nico's pace and was not good enough with racecraft. Otherwise, he would have scored today.
I think Bortoletto's problem is that he's a rookie and Hülkenberg's been here for 15
Yes.
years. Like what we saw today was very similar to Bessie Haas in 22, where Magnussen's scoring points and Mick isn't. Like, yeah, that's kind of what it's quite a similar situation. But yeah, supreme weekend from them. If they can keep that up, then they might actually generate some interest for once instead of just being invisible and bleh. Even so, it is kind of depressing. We're still at the stage where Hülkenberg doesn't have a single bloody podium. There's just this complete anomaly when you rank the drivers by race starts, and he's third, and he's surrounded by like Max and Lewis and everyone with like 30, 40, 50 wins, and he's got not one podium. It is quite depressing. I think Oscar has already outscored him in 3 seasons as well. It's not good, but we'll see. Maybe there's something to look forward to here for once with Sauber. And also it means that they've kicked themselves from 10th to 8th in the constructors, so they're making gains, and maybe they'll go after Haas soon as well. So then next is Racing Bulls. Hadjar, again, supreme performance from him, finishes 7th. Pace is good, made Q3. But Lawson was very erratic. He was smashing into people constantly at turn 1. He was getting in Max's way, just about salvages 11th, but it's like his confidence is coming back, but he's still being beaten by Hadjar, and it's not. He's becoming. It's very depressing. We've talked about this before. He's becoming the flop of the season at this point.
I think I'd argue that Doohan and possibly Colapinto are slightly worse, but I get your point.
We'll get to them in a second.
Yeah. But I will say, yeah, Hadjar. To be honest, I was watching the race in the car on my way back from my uni flat, and I didn't hear Hadjar's name once. But if he's finished 7th, that's a fantastic race. What I did see was Lawson and Behrman. I don't know how Behrman got a 10-second time penalty for. I believe it was a similar situation to what Russell and Verstappen had. It was a similar sort of thing where he gets forced off a circuit, he then rejoins the circuit and somehow gets a penalty. They need to fix that runoff. That runoff at the exit from the exit of turn 1 to the exit of turn 1 to the Bollard round turn 3. It's faster to do that than it is the regular track, and it shouldn't be like that. It should be at least a slight slowdown. I don't know if they can put some sort of like flick chicane or some sort of gimmicky system in because it's faster, and he got ahead because it's faster.
Or they do what they used to always do, which is just gravel. What about that? Punish people for mistake. Yeah, something like that. Because we had that until at least 2012. I'm trying to think beyond that when they decided to throw in the runoff and the escape road. But yeah, the escape road should not be faster because we've seen like Alonso at Sochi worked out that the escape road is faster as well. It's stupid. It's like, no, gravel. Because the rest of the circuit is actually fairly generous on having gravel and grass. They've just decided turn 1 needs it. It's like, how many actually like big crashes have there been at turn 1? Like, not very many. You get some knocks at the start. We had Schumacher ploughing into Senna. Yeah, it's not known for huge accidents.
I think the part of it, I'm not sure because I know MotoGP has some of those alternate layouts. I think that runoff area might double as a MotoGP, like one of those Joker laps.
Oh, maybe it does. Yeah.
Yes, I remember last year the MotoGP race in Barcelona had a massive crash.
Right,
and it's probably because since it doubles as a MotoGP track, then it has some requirements. It cannot be like Imola is.
Do they use that chicane at turn 9? Because there's that extension that F1 never uses. I'm wondering if that gets used for motorbikes or something.
They used to use it in F1 back in the 90s.
Well, they did in '94 as a temporary solution, didn't they?
They use that with tyre barriers. I've just realised. A whole
Yeah, they've never used that chicane normally. It's the same as there's the chicane at Suzuka just after the hairpin, which I think is only used for motorbikes before they get to Spoon. And I just kind of wondered because otherwise it just sits there, never getting used, I guess.
Can we just cut there? I've just seen my PC is about.
About Lawson, what I truly saw at the beginning when he debuted last year, he was this aggressive young kid, very fast. And, since then it has only gotten worse. He's still this very aggressive driver who makes mistake, contact. Yesterday he made contact with Albon and then he made contact with Berman and wasn't even really that incisive in his overtakes, He lost a lot of time trying to get past these cars. And so, the hype behind Lawson is truly going away. Not just because he's slower than Hajar, not because he flopped at Red Bull, but simply because he also used to be this, aggressive young kid everyone liked. And now he's too aggressive. He's screwing up too much in his racecraft.
It's going from being aggressive to just stupid, and he's driving with like small dick energy and everything. It's just not going well for him. But yeah. Another team which was a sort of race of two halves is Alpine, because Gasly made Q3 and it looked a bit shaky in the middle of the race, but he came back and got himself into the points. So he did reasonably well, I think, driving a lot of enthusiasm after the win in the Champions League. But Colapinto is already under pressure, and he has been absolutely abysmal in these past three races. Like, I would say worse than Doohan at this point. And he's getting pressure from the Flav, and it's like, it's almost as if swapping drivers out willy-nilly in an era where we still have a testing ban that was brought in 17 years ago because of a global financial crisis is not working, because they have no time to get ready. Like, because in any other 20 years ago, he would have been driving several hundred miles per week in that car and doing all the stuff, and he would jump in and it would be absolutely fine. But now it's not working, and it's a big flop. And as well as being slow, he's brought with him this just psychotic fan base as well, which is not helping his position at all. And yeah, you wonder if they might just, if that 5-race stint is going to become literal and they might just bring Doohan back.
The thing that completely puts me off about Colapinto is that the thing that completely puts me off about Colapinto is that when he came in at Williams towards the middle part of 2024, by the second race he was on Albon's pace, and he showed that. Don't get me wrong, he was a bit erratic. In those first few races, he made a couple of mistakes, but he overall was matching and beating Albon. I think he beat Albon in Singapore, and then he had a couple more races where he was equaling Albon, and then towards the end of the year, making mistakes. But we also had the caveat of Albon and Sargent both crashed a lot, so it was clearly the car. Now this year, he's lost the pace that he had that really set him alight and put people on his side, and he's kept the crashing, which, well, I know we said that Williams was just hard to drive, and that's probably the reason why they were all crashing, but that maybe indicates that's not the case. Obviously, Doohan was, Gasly hasn't been. It's a very odd dichotomy from 2024 to 2025, because, as I said, he showed potential in 24, and now that potential has just seemed to go down the drain. Now, do we, obviously, it's been 2 races. Do we say, okay, we'll give him the 5 races and see if he improves? Because he was at Monaco, which is, or Imola. Sorry, it's not races. It's been 3 races now. I apologize.
Yes.
Well, it's because he's had Imola, Monaco, and Spain. 2 of those are very conventional tracks that have no sort of issues or caveats. Obviously, Monaco, not only the 2-stop, but just in general, is not a representative track for most drivers. I'm trying to think, because the next ones are Canada and Austria, I believe. Austria will be a fantastic track because F2 and F3 have done it for the last 5,000 years. Canada he might struggle with because I don't believe he's raced around there at all. And
He'll be in the wall in Canada.
yeah,
That's
I
a
believe
given.
at least at one point during the weekend. Maybe he'll go into the Wall of Champions and then recover and become champion. I don't know. But for every Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher that's gone in the wall, there's been a Kobayashi.
For this weekend only, I'm gonna come in the defense of Colapinto because he wasn't doing very badly in Q1. Okay, I think he would have gotten into Q2, but then he had that problem in the pit lane, so he didn't set a lap time, and so completely got screwed over by a car issue. And Gasly instead, he was starting best of the rest. So already Colapinto was compromised in his starting position. And then, as we saw in the race, the Alpine excellent in qualifying for a midfielder, but in the race it was not as good, nowhere near. Gasly got overtaken fair and square by Ajar, beaten in strategy and race pace by Hülkenberg, and if the safety car didn't come out at the end, he was going to get beaten by Lawson and Fernando Alonso. And Lawson was starting a fair bit behind him. So the Alpine clearly did not have a good race pace. I did not follow closely enough Colapinto to make a real opinion. But clearly, if a driver is starting last and the car has not great race pace, there is not much he can do. This weekend is not on Colapinto that he performed badly. It simply is not his fault this weekend.
In conclusion, Albon is washed. So I think now we should move to Aston Martin. Only one driver in the car for the race. So we need to talk about the situation with Stroll first, because he had to withdraw from the race because of pain in his hand and wrist, which is a hangover from the beginning of 23 when he broke his hand was this a cycling accident, or it was before testing, wasn't it? Yeah. And he missed testing because wasn't it No, the year before. Yeah, Drogovic did all the testing, and then he got in trouble because he liked a tweet basically being like, "Oh, why does Stroll get to race? He didn't test the car or something." But then, so he did that. So he withdrew because of that. But then there were also reports about him basically having a temper tantrum in the garage and like smashing things up and everything, which is possible. I mean, we saw what happened in Qatar 2 years ago with him pushing his race engineer. But as it is, because he needs to have surgery, it seems unlikely he'll be in the car in 2 weeks in Canada. And this begs the question about who goes in that seat, because normally the one team that has never needed test reserve or development drivers suddenly doesn't have any, because you'd think Drogovic is the obvious choice, but then he's busy that weekend. Van Dorn is busy that weekend. Crawford doesn't have the super license points. Jess Hawkins, no thanks. Other than that, they're not really. There's no one else left, and some people were hinting that Vettel would do it, and Vettel is not going to do that. He can't get ready for that in a fortnight. The most realistic option seems to be Bottas if he gets loaned over from Mercedes, because the other reserves in the paddock are not affiliated with Mercedes, or they're people like Ryo Harikawa, who's done some FP1s and nothing else, or Victor Martins, who just did his first FP1. And then Joe is with Ferrari, so he won't be there. Checo, no one wants him. So yeah, probably Bottas, but we'll see.
I was just about to mention Bottas, and I think that's probably the safest option. Probably one of the most recent with race experience. Knows what he's doing. Canada, I mean, he qualified third there in 2013. I mean, that's a very that's a very old reference, and it's probably not even relevant. But again, yeah, Bottas wouldn't crash the car, and he wouldn't be stinking up the house or whatever. He would just be there, I think, and that's all they need. They just need someone who's fill in the seat for a weekend or two, and then wait for Stroll to get. What drives me up the wall about this whole conversation is how much people are trying to rate Drogovic, and how much people have said, like, again, it's mostly Twitter morons, So we can pass off most of it. But there are genuinely people who think that in his first weekend in a Formula One car, Drugovich would outperform anything Stroll's done for the last 3 years, and it drives me up the wall because not only, like, don't get me wrong, we can talk about Drugovich's junior career. We can talk about the fact that yes, he's an F2 champion, but he was a third-year champion in a field that was pretty weak for F2 standards. Not only that, that's a point in itself, but the fact that he's not driven any Formula car in anger in an actual series for 3 years. The amount of, or 2.5 years if we want to be pedantic, but the fact that he is that far out of practice, like, yes, he's done FP1s, yes, he would have done simulator work, but we saw with Jack Doohan, simulator work doesn't give you the full picture. We've seen with other drivers that it's just not how it works, and Drugovich would not. I'd be surprised if he didn't qualify and finish last in his F1 debut because he just doesn't have a recent experience. Get Bottas in there; he'll do a reasonable job. He probably won't be anywhere near Alonso's pace. He'll probably be like 19th, 18th if Alonso's 10th. But that's all you need. You don't need to want to go on and perform miracles.
On your thing, the simulator, it's actually more true for Aston Martin since last weekend at Monaco. Dewey said that the simulator was not close enough to reality. So that's even more true for Aston Martin about driver not being ready just by driving on the simulator. I still believe that if Stroll needs to be replaced, Dragovic will be the man. He is on the spare Cadillac for Le Mans, so he's not giving up much. And Le Mans he can do another year for one. First of all, we will see if he gets the chance, because we must remember when he got injured, Stroll, at the beginning of 2023, he had around 2 weeks to get back in the car, and then he drove the first weekend with the vibrating hands and all the pain. Clearly, now we know it was not a good choice, and he's paying the consequences now. But he could very well make the same bad choice again, and just don't take enough recovery time and make the comeback for Canada, and then maybe he has problems next year with the hands again. You know, this thing happens more often with the riders in MotoGP. You know, they got injured and they don't take enough recovery time just to get back on the bike. And I think Marc Marquez was the one who misjudged it and compromised himself for a few years. You know, Lance Stroll could very well make the same bad choice, and we can see him again in Canada.
I don't think he'd be as inclined to do that because he's seen what the effects of that will happen. It is an entirely interesting point because let's say, because they talked about the past 6 weeks he's been having these pains. Obviously, that's consciously. When you have pain, obviously it's conscious. But we need to figure out, has there been some underlying problems that he's had since 2023 that has contributed to his performance? And if that's not the case, that's fair enough. But also,
he was useless before 23 as well.
Exactly.
So I don't think so.
He wasn't useless before 23. He had his good seasons. But like this year, for example, like if for the past 6 weeks, how many races fall in the last 6 weeks? It's got to be at least 3 or 4. And
Since Miami.
Since Miami. So that's
the race before Miami, Jeddah. So okay, let's go by calendar. Imola was the 18th of May. So the race before Miami was the 4th of May. And that's about 4 weeks from now. So 2 weeks prior would be Jeddah. Yeah. So by this logic, he started feeling pain in his hands since Jeddah. And I guess, and it's only my guess, it's that he started feeling pain in Jeddah, but the medical team said it's gonna pass away. And then he went to Miami, and same thing. And then from Imola to Monaco and now to Spain, it just got worse. And it got to the point that on Saturday afternoon, they decided, no, this is enough. You need, it's actually a critical condition. You need to fix those hands. I think this is a reasonable guess on how things played out.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly go and see if I can get up some statistics and see if there was if on the statistical front there was a steep drop off in performance from Miami or Jeddah. I'll maybe look at Jeddah onwards to see if Lance has had a steep drop off in performance. As I'm just trying to load up my Excel spreadsheet. It's taking ages to do so, but it would be interesting to see just how it has affected Lance, because as I said, like 2023 and 2024 were some of his worst seasons of his career, if not the worst, because 2017 was middling, but he was all right because he was a rookie. 2018 was again pretty average, but he was in the worst car on the grid, so that was fine. 2019 was a bit stinky. 2020 was the best season of his career, and he was better than Perez. And ever since then, he's kind of been either blindingly average or mediocre, and that's just the problem he's had since then. If I look at so I've looked at his. So he was keeping up with Alonso for the first 3 races. Then Japan, he had a stinker. Bahrain, he had a stinker. Jeddah, he actually had a step up in performance. And then since then, he's been very inconsistent. So, I mean, you could argue the pain affects his consistency more than his pace, and that would make sense, because handling pain is another thing to think about in the car, I suppose.
So I clearly, being an Alonso fan, I clearly follow close enough the team. As I saw it, it was the normal gap since the start of the year. Then Jeddah Miami still the normal gap, and only in these last 3 weekends did I see a Stroll more comfortably behind Alonso than he was before. And I initially guessed it was just the upgrade package that came at Imola, and maybe it suited Alonso more than Stroll. And now there is this question mark. Maybe it was the hands.
Yes.
So we will see if Stroll makes a comeback in reasonable time.
We'll also need to see if this injury affects him permanently, because again, if it is one of those recurring injuries, like you see footballers have recurring injuries, and it just kills their career because they can't perform to the level they want to. We'll have to see if this happens for Stroll, and if let's say he does come back after, or he takes the break he needs to. He takes 1-2 races to come back, and then he's still performing at that struggling level. He might just realise, actually, you know what, my hand's hurting. I'm just going to go off to WEC or somewhere where it's a bit less physically, constrained, where he can afford to have like an injury, like Kubica's had, for example.
Yeah, I mean, if it becomes a permanent retirement, I mean, his wrist won't heal, but nature will. If that happens, Lawrence, I think, is going to lose interest and probably sell the team, and someone else will buy it, and mix and match again at Team Silverstone. But Alonso, so that was a struggle. Finally got points. Took him long enough. I mean, he made Q3 and then dropped back at the start. He had his little Damon Hill mental fatigue Suzuka 99 moment, which should have cost him points, but then he just clung it back at the end. That was a huge amount of effort to go through just to get 2 measly points, really.
It has been this way for Alonso since 2015, so it's not unprecedented at all for Alonso to struggle so much for so little. Anyway, about this race, the Saturday could have done better. Maybe he had a slight battery issue out of the last corner, but then the main issue is he did not improve enough from Q2 to Q3 than the others did, and it's not entirely down to track evolution, that battery. I think Gasly. So the Alpine, I didn't say before. The Gasly in his Q3 lap took turn 9 and the last turn flat out. Okay, Piastri did not take the last turn flat out. So clearly the Alpine maybe was not beatable by the other midfielder on Saturday. Hadjar, I think it was beatable, but when the margins are so little, Alonso was within a tenth of Gasly, within half a tenth of Hadjar. What could have been, what could have been not, guys? That's the performance. We came on Sunday. The Aston Martin was not at the level of Racing Bull and Sauber. He was ideally he would have been fighting Gasly for P10. Then stuff happened in the race. He went off because during the stints, as the tire got older, the Aston Martin just was taking so much understeer. He pitted and he put 1.5% more wing on the front wing. It's insanity, 1.5%. 0.6 in the first stint at the first stop, and 0.9 after the second stop. You know the driver is really struggling when he comes to the pit stop and tell the team, okay guys, we need to be drastic, 0.6 on the front wing. And then he comes next pit stop and says, guys, we were not drastic enough, 0.9% on the front wing. Anyway, he made a mistake, he went off, lost 10 seconds. Those 10 seconds made very much the difference, because it put him in the fight with the rest of the midfield. You know, he pitted, had to fight Colapinto, had to fight Sainz, then was on a strategical race with Tsunoda, and got stuck behind Lawson, and had to fight Berman. You know, an entire mess of the race. At the end, those 10 seconds meant he was lapped when a safety car came out. It meant he pitted and came out behind Piastri. You know, he could, if he were unlapped and he would have been without the DOF, he would have done a few laps, then pitted in perfect clear traffic, and then he would have been fighting Gasly, Hajar, and Hamilton for the point positions. At the end of the day, instead, he had to force the overtakes on Ocon, on Bortoleto, and what a struggle against Bortoleto was, and then finally Lawson, just to finish P10th, that barely turned into P9 thanks to Verstappen's penalty. And I say barely because at one point on the last lap, Alonso was more than 10 seconds away from Verstappen, and only because Russell was damaged by Verstappen and so could not go fast enough, and so was basically blocking Verstappen, did the gap was pushed back under 10 seconds on the last lap. So even that was a struggle. Completely agreed. But the mistake, he should have beaten Gasly. He should have beaten Gasly, and he did not. It was a costly mistake.
And after all that, he stormed his way from 18th to 18th in the standings. So then you think it's bad, and then you get to Williams. They've been on a high, and then this race just happened. I mean, Sainz knocks out in Q1, does absolutely nothing in the race, is just nowhere. Albon gets his wing damaged twice, and I think they retired him partly because they knew what's the point, but also they probably ran out of wings. This again is a recurring theme, and it's to do with the size of the cars. This happens at the start of the race. You get a tiny little knock, and it does enough damage to your wing that you need to pit, and it's like, because the cars are so big that they still struggle with wheel to wheel sometimes, and that, whereas in the olden days, you didn't really get that as much. It was more, the cars are small, we can see everything. If we're going to hit each other, it's going to take the whole wing off. It's not just going to take off one tiny little end plate, and that's enough to wreck it from the slightest bit of contact. But even so, I think points would have been a struggle, which is odd because everything had been going so well before this, and then this race just was garbage.
So Williams claimed even before Barcelona, so they did expect that Barcelona would be a struggle for them, because Williams saw the issue with their car are medium high speed corners that go on for very long. Okay, if it's a very sharp turn or just you turn and nothing else, the car behaves very well. And that has been the case so far. Barcelona, it is not at all that case. It's all very long, high-speed corners. Turn 3, turn 9, the last two corners. And so the Williams was always going to struggle. They did expect that they would not be as competitive. And that's exactly what we saw. Sainz should have done better than being out in Q1. But at the same time, I cannot really blame him. That driver on a car that struggles also struggles. So, he's forgiven. Albon did quite well, but, two front wings gone, and, it made sense to retire him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's just a bit of a boring team to cover in this race. There wasn't really much going on, and then when there was, it was just so.
Okay, last team, Haas. Nedzo, Bear Boy, go.
Right, so genuinely, I think if I had control of the FIA, I'd fire them all and shoot them into the sun. Or shoot them all and fire them into the sun would work equally as well. I don't know how he's got how many penalties has he got in recent weeks is just baffling to me. He finished ahead of Ocon on track after an amazing qualifying. That's the one thing he's had throughout this season. Admittedly, he's been a bit inconsistent. I'll give you that. But his one lap pace when it comes to qualifying and when it comes to clutching up in the good moments, he is fantastic, and I think he's proven that. And I said, even in this race, he was ahead of Ocon on track before he got a 10-second time penalty for taking the escape road when you're told to take the escape road, and was told he gained too much of an advantage. It's like that's the FIA's fault. Again, we talked about this for not putting the escape road to make it slower than the actual circuit, or just make racing rules where you have to leave room for the driver on the outside. It's ridiculous. This idea that you can just force someone off the track because you want to, and that when they do get forced off track and there's a prescribed route that they have to go, they can then be punished for taking that prescribed route. It's ridiculous. I don't see how it's in any way logical, because it isn't in any way logical. And again, don't get me wrong, Behrman wasn't fighting for points. He would have never gotten points, and without it, he didn't make any difference to his race in terms of that. But the precedent is just shocking. He got a penalty he got a 10-place grid penalty in Monaco, the highest grid penalty since Pastor Maldonado got one in 2012 for a stupid crash of someone in practice. But Ollie gets a grid penalty for overtaking someone when it couldn't have been avoided because they were going at a snail's pace, and because I know there was later arguments that he said he didn't think that he had to imminently slow down for the red flag, but it's just the case that where you look on the TV pods or the TV cameras and you see that you only see one red flag like a second before he gets to the car because it's a blind corner. It's just I don't see how he's getting all these penalties, and it's just baffling to me. Ocon, meanwhile, he wasn't bad. He was just average. Ollie was slightly above average. I'd probably put him. If Ocon was a B driver in this race, I'd probably put Ollie as an A-. That's all I'd say. If Ocon's a 6, then Ollie's a 7, kind of stuff. It wasn't groundbreaking, but then at the same time, it wasn't average from Ollie or from Ocon.
So I want to ask a question to you, Nedzo, from
Yes.
an Alonso fan to a Berman fan who both had Ocon as teammate. Because what I saw from Ocon was that half of the time he was a very good driver, ever so slightly faster than Alonso in qualifying, but never quite to his level on race pace. The point is that whenever he was at this very good high level, half of the races he was at an abysmally lower level where he's just nowhere near in a qualifying or race pace to Fernando Alonso. And now, just looking at qualifying results this year, I see basically the same pattern that sometimes Ocon, he's on the pace with Berman, okay, he's better. But the other times he's nowhere, absolutely nowhere compared to Berman. Berman makes it Q2 comfortably, Ocon is last. Can you elaborate on this? Can you tell me if my impression is wrong? What is going on with Ocon?
I can somewhat see that. I think the point we have to concede is the fact that Alonso was, especially 2021, coming back after a few years away. He was going to take some time to bed in. And I think it was the case that he struggled for like 5 rounds before he properly got up to grips with things. And I think that tends to be the case. Ollie's qualifying pace is amazing. I think his race pace, it can be lacking. Like when he's good, he's great, but when he's struggling, you can see it. And I think if he focuses on his race pace and also his wet weather, because we saw in Australia and we saw in Brazil last year, he struggled quite a bit in wet weather. If you can improve on those two things, again, I think race pace will come with being a rookie. He will get that as he develops as a driver, and I think that as long as he gets the time he needs and that he doesn't get unnecessary pressure put onto him, like if he gets a Haas, I'm not sure how long his deal with Haas is at the moment, but it's got to be multi-year, surely. As long as he stays with Haas through 2026, we see what happens to Hamilton. I see Hamilton potentially retiring after 26. Behrman goes to Ferrari, even if he's had like an average season, because there's no one else really who can go into that seat. And he goes up against Charles. And it would be interesting to see how Ollie would do up against a qualifying specialist like Charles is. But I think he would at least equal him at some points, and if not beat him. But yeah, I think the main thing that Ollie needs to focus on, I know what it is wet. I think his race pace will come with it. And again, I do see the comp with Ocon that we've had with Alonso, because Ollie's had some fantastic performances in Imola. When Ocon was back row of the grid, Ollie was on course. I think you mentioned he into Q3, but he was very close to doing so. And that's just because he is fantastic in I think it's because he is a very aggressive driver when it comes to his inputs, and he pushes to those limits more so than other drivers. And that does come with mistakes. He does come with incidents. We saw that this weekend in FP2, like not necessarily needless accidents and spins and errors, but they are sort of hampering his maybe not his reputation, because I remember in Australia a lot of people were talking about his incidents in free practice, but now he has sort of calmed down. But he's still there. His qualifying pace is. I'd put his qualifying pace top 5 on the grid pretty easily.
I think he's hampered by the fact that Haas have done what they always do, which is start the season strongly and then just fall off a cliff, and that's happened again.
Yeah.
So they're not, because only a few races ago it's like, oh, this is going rather well, and then you look at their results, it's like, actually it hasn't been that good this year. Like they haven't. It's just Ocon has pulled a couple of miracles out, but they haven't been, like, their last double points was in Bahrain.
Yeah.
So not brilliant. Having made a significant turnaround by China. So yeah, the grid is shifting, and I think it has. Everyone expected this technical directive to make differences to McLaren. It seems to have made differences everywhere else, though. So tops and flops for the weekend. I think for me, for tops, it's fairly easy. It would be Piastri, Hülkenberg, and Hadjar.
Oh, that's some interesting picks. I think Hülkenberg is definitely up there. Or no, for me, he's first. I'd say he's the one who executed in the race, especially. If we're going full weekend, I could argue maybe second or third. Let me think of who else was good. Leclerc. I put Leclerc up there. And maybe do I go with someone boring like Piastri? Because usually I'd put someone like Max in, because Max always usually has a good weekend, but I can't really do that this weekend. Yeah, I'll go Hülkenberg, Leclerc, Piastri in that order: first, second, third.
The flops. With flops, it seems like we either meant to do 3 or we're meant to do 1, but 3 is more interesting. Flops. God, there are so many. You could pick.
Yeah.
Lewis.
Yeah.
Lawson, I think, and Max.
I wouldn't go as far to call Max a flop, because aside from the incident, he had a fantastic race.
Yeah.
I'd probably go Antonelli's engine. Has to be one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Would I go Lewis as an absolute flop, because he did kind of execute qualifying, and in the race he was kind of I'll probably put him as a third flop though, rather than actually
he went backwards for the first time in a very long time.
Yeah. And maybe I won't go Colapinto. I think that's unfair. So maybe what you did with Lawson.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. So yeah, interesting race in the end. I mean, admittedly only because of the safety car, because without that it would have been a very, very uneventful race. But also I think Max would have appreciated that more, because he would have finished third, and he wouldn't now be 40 points behind Piastri, because he'd said going into the weekend, he kind of conceded the title is lost, because there's the odd race here and there where he pulls an amazing lap out of his arse and then holds the lead and can beat them. But there are going to be too many races like this and races like Bahrain where he loses out, whereas McLaren are, unless there's a track like Baku or Singapore that has quite unique characteristics that just don't work for them, they're going to be fastest at every race and they're going to run away with it.
Yeah.
And so now I suppose it's just a case of seeing who's going to take it. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify, and you can find us on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.
Goodbye.